October 15th, 2019, the day Marcus Bennett walked into Jefferson Middle School and made a claim that would change everything. When he told his classmates his father was a founding member of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, they laughed in his face and called him a pathetic liar, desperate for attention. But when 100 Harley-Davidsons thundered into the school parking lot the very next morning, every single person who doubted him had to ask themselves one question: what kind of man commands that level of brotherhood, and what had they just done to his son? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus Bennett had learned early in life that some truths were better left unspoken. At 12 years old, he'd mastered the art of deflection, of changing subjects when kids asked about his family, of keeping his head down and his story simple. His father worked construction. His mom was a nurse. They lived in a modest house on Maple Street in Riverside, Colorado. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make him stand out. But on that Tuesday morning in October, everything changed because of one kid with a big mouth and an even bigger need to be the center of attention. Dylan Chambers was the kind of student who thrived on social hierarchy. 8th grade royalty, captain of the basketball team, and blessed with the type of confidence that came from never being told no in his entire life. His father owned 3 car dealerships across the state, and Dylan made sure everyone knew it. He wore expensive sneakers, carried the latest phone, and had a talent for sniffing out anyone he perceived as beneath him. Marcus had done everything right to stay off Dylan's radar. He sat in the middle rows, never raised his hand too much, ate lunch with a small group of quiet friends who played chess and talked about video games. He was invisible, and invisible was safe. That morning, Mrs. Patterson announced the assignment that would unravel everything. Class, for your social studies project, you'll be interviewing a family member about their life experiences. She explained, writing details on the whiteboard. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone with an interesting story to share about their career, their travels, or a significant moment in their life. You'll present your findings to the class next week. The classroom erupted into excited chatter. Kids immediately started bragging about who they'd interview. Sarah Winters announced her grandmother had been a Broadway dancer. Jake Morrison's uncle had climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. Dylan predictably declared he'd interview his father about building a business empire. Marcus stayed quiet, his mind already working through the problem. His mother's nursing stories were standard. Compassionate, sure, but nothing that would capture attention in a room full of competitive 12-year-olds trying to one-up each other. His father, though. His father's story was extraordinary. It was also complicated. During lunch, Marcus sat with his usual crew in the corner of the cafeteria. His best friend, Tyler Rodriguez, was sketching in his notebook while eating a sandwich one-handed. "So who are you interviewing?" Tyler asked without looking up from his drawing. "Probably my mom," Marcus said, pushing tater tots around his tray. "She's got some decent hospital stories." "Boring," Tyler said with a grin. "My abuela is telling me about escaping Cuba on a raft in the 60s. That's going to crush everyone's presentations." Marcus smiled weakly. If only Tyler knew what his father could talk about. The open roads, the brotherhood, the 40 years of loyalty to something bigger than himself. But those stories came with patches, with leather, with a reputation that Marcus had spent his entire middle school career trying to avoid. That's when Dylan's voice cut through the cafeteria noise like a knife. "Hey, Bennett!" Dylan had somehow materialized at their table, flanked by his usual entourage of athletes and wannabes. "I heard your dad's just some construction worker who drops you off in that beat-up truck every morning. That's pretty sad, man. My presentation's going to be about real success." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his eyes on his tray. "Don't engage. Don't give him anything. Leave him alone, Dylan," Tyler said. Finally looking up from his sketch, "I'm just stating facts." "Rodriguez?" Dylan leaned against the table, clearly enjoying himself. "Some of us have families worth talking about, and some of us don't." Something inside Marcus snapped. Maybe it was the way Dylan smirked. Maybe it was years of watching his father be humble about a life that was anything but ordinary. Maybe it was just being 12 years old and tired of being treated like he was less than. "My father's a founding member of the Iron Wolves," Marcus heard himself say. The words hung in the air like smoke. The table went silent. Dylan's smirk faltered for just a second before transforming into something worse, mockery mixed with disbelief. "The Iron Wolves," Dylan repeated loudly, loud enough that nearby tables turned to listen. "The motorcycle club. You're saying your dad is in a biker gang?" "It's not a gang," Marcus said, his voice steadier than he felt. "It's a brotherhood. He helped found the Colorado chapter in 1979. He's been a member for over 40 years. Dylan laughed, a sharp theatrical sound designed for maximum humiliation. "Right, and my dad is secretly Batman. Dude, everyone knows the Iron Wolves. They're legendary. And you're trying to tell us that your dad, the guy who drives a construction truck and looks like somebody's boring uncle, is one of them?" Other kids were definitely listening now. Marcus could feel dozens of eyes on him, could hear the whispers spreading through the cafeteria like wildfire. "I'm not lying," Marcus said quietly. "Prove it," Dylan challenged. "If your dad is really some badass biker, where's his motorcycle? Where's his leather jacket? Why does he look like he shops at Costco? He doesn't ride to school. He keeps that part of his life separate, because it's not real." Dylan was playing to the crowd now, fully in his element. "You're making this up because you're embarrassed that your family is boring. This is honestly pathetic, Bennett. Like really sad." Marcus stood up, his lunch tray clattering. "My father is William Ironside Bennett. Look him up. The Iron Wolves aren't just some club, they're family. They've been brothers for decades, and my dad has earned more respect in that world than you could ever understand." The cafeteria had gone almost completely quiet. Even kids from other grades were watching the confrontation unfold. Dylan pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. After a moment, he looked up with an expression of pure triumph. "I'm looking at the Iron Wolves website right now. There's no William Bennett listed anywhere. No Ironside, nothing." "You're a liar. They don't put founding members on the public website," Marcus protested, but even he could hear how weak it sounded. "Convenient," Dylan sneered. He turned to address the growing audience. "Marcus Bennett, everybody. So desperate for attention that he's making up stories about his dad being in a motorcycle club. This is honestly the saddest thing I've ever seen." Laughter rippled through the cafeteria, not from everyone, but from enough kids that Marcus felt his face burn with humiliation. Tyler stood up beside him, loyal but helpless. "It's true," Marcus said one more time, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "Sure it is," Dylan said, clapping him on the shoulder with fake sympathy. "And tomorrow, I'm sure your dad will show up with 100 bikers to prove it." "Oh wait, that's not going to happen because you're lying." As Dylan walked away, still laughing with his friends, Marcus sank back into his seat. His hands were shaking. Around him, students returned to their conversations, but he could still hear his name being passed around, could still feel the weight of their judgment. Tyler sat down beside him. "Man, why did you say that?" "Because it's true," Marcus said, staring at his untouched lunch. "Every word of it is true. Then why haven't you ever mentioned it before?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Because I knew this would happen. The rest of the school day was torture." In every class, Marcus could feel eyes on him. Kids whispered and giggled. Someone had apparently posted about the cafeteria incident on social media, because even students who hadn't been there seemed to know about the biker gang lie. By the time the final bell rang, Marcus just wanted to disappear. He walked to the pickup area where his father's truck was already waiting. A reliable Ford F-150, dusty from job sites, completely unremarkable. His father sat behind the wheel, wearing a faded t-shirt and jeans, looking exactly like what he was, a hard-working man in his 50s who'd spent the day laying foundations and framing walls. Marcus climbed into the passenger seat and said nothing. "Rough day?" his father asked, pulling away from the school. Marcus stared out the window, watching Jefferson Middle School disappear behind them. "Dad," he finally said, "can I ask you something about the Iron Wolves?" His father's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but his voice remained calm. "What about them? Are you ashamed of it? Of that part of your life?" William Bennett was quiet for several blocks. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Marcus had rarely heard. "Son, I've never been ashamed of my brothers. Not for one single day. But I've always kept that world separate from you because I wanted you to have a normal childhood. I wanted you to be judged for who you are, not who your father rides with. What if I told you everyone at school thinks I'm a liar?" Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. "What if I told you I mentioned the Iron Wolves and now everyone thinks I made the whole thing up for attention?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Then back to the story. His father pulled the truck over to the side of the road and put it in park. He turned to face Marcus fully, and in his eyes, Marcus saw something he'd never quite noticed before. A depth, a hardness, a history of loyalty and brotherhood that went far beyond construction sites and parent-teacher conferences. "Tell me exactly what happened," William said, and Marcus did. He told him everything. Dylan's taunts, the cafeteria confrontation, the laughter, the humiliation. By the end, his father was nodding slowly, a strange smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "So you defended my honor," William said. "You stood up for the Brotherhood, even though you knew it might cost you. I didn't mean to. You did the right thing, Marcus. You told the truth, even when it was hard." His father pulled out his phone and started typing a message. "Tomorrow is going to be interesting. What are you doing?" William Bennett looked at his son, and for the first time, Marcus saw his father not as a construction worker or a dad, but as Ironside, a founding member of one of the most respected motorcycle clubs in Colorado. "I'm making a phone call," his father said simply. "To my brothers." That evening, the Bennett household felt different. Marcus sat at the kitchen table doing homework he couldn't concentrate on, listening to his father's low voice drifting from the garage. William had been on the phone for over an hour, and though Marcus couldn't make out specific words, he recognized the tone, serious, measured, the voice of someone coordinating something significant. His mother, Rebecca, moved around the kitchen preparing dinner with practiced efficiency. She'd been a trauma nurse for 15 years, which meant very little rattled her. But Marcus noticed she kept glancing toward the garage door, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "Mom," Marcus ventured, "is Dad actually calling the club?" Rebecca set down the wooden spoon she'd been using and turned to face her son. She had the kind eyes of someone who'd seen people at their worst and still chose compassion. But right now those eyes held something else, pride mixed with a hint of mischief. "Your father has been part of the Iron Wolves since before I met him," she said, leaning against the counter. "When we started dating, I thought it was just a hobby. Guys who liked motorcycles, weekend rides, that sort of thing. Then I met them. What were they like?" Rebecca's smile widened. "Terrifying at first. Imagine showing up to meet your boyfriend's friends and being greeted by 50 men, covered in leather and tattoos, bikes that sounded like thunder. This whole world I knew nothing about." She paused, her expression softening. "But then they welcomed me like family. These men, some of them lawyers, teachers, mechanics, veterans, they'd literally give you the shirt off their backs. Your father's brothers aren't just friends, Marcus. They're bound by something deeper." The garage door opened, and William emerged, slipping his phone into his pocket. His expression was unreadable, but there was an energy about him that Marcus had never quite seen before. "It's handled," was all he said. "How many?" Rebecca asked, a knowing look passing between them. "Enough," William replied, then looked at Marcus. "Son, tomorrow morning you're going to see a side of my life I've kept separate from school. I need you to understand something. What happens tomorrow isn't about embarrassing anyone or proving you right. It's about honoring the truth and showing you what brotherhood really means." Marcus swallowed hard. "Dylan's going to lose it. Dylan," William said carefully, "is going to learn a valuable lesson about making assumptions. But that's not why we're doing this. We're doing this because you stood up for something real. And when someone stands up for the Iron Wolves stand up for them. Even when that someone is 12 years old. Sleep didn't come easily for Marcus that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing through possibilities. What would tomorrow actually look like? Would his father really bring the motorcycle club to school? What would the other kids say? What would Dylan do? Around midnight, Marcus heard the distinctive rumble of a motorcycle engine outside. Then another, and another. He crept to his bedroom window and pulled back the curtain to see his father standing in the driveway, talking with 3 men on Harley Davidsons. Even in the dim streetlight, Marcus could make out their leather vests, the patches that identified them as Iron Wolves. But one of the riders, a massive man with a grey beard that reached his chest, pulled off his helmet and embraced William in the kind of hug that spoke of decades of shared history. They talked for several minutes, their breath visible in the cool October air, before the riders fired up their engines and disappeared into the night. Marcus let the curtain fall back and returned to bed, his heart pounding with an emotion he couldn't quite name. It was somewhere between excitement and anxiety, anticipation and fear. The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of his mother's famous pancakes, the kind she only made for special occasions. When he came downstairs, both parents were already awake, dressed, and moving with purpose. His father wore dark jeans and boots, but instead of his usual work shirt, he'd pulled out something Marcus had only seen a handful of times in his life, his leather vest. The black leather was worn soft with age, covered in patches that told a story Marcus was only beginning to understand. On the back, beautifully detailed, was the Iron Wolves Club emblem, a wolf's head in profile, howling at a full moon, surrounded by the words, Iron Wolves Emk, Colorado. Chapter founded 1979. Smaller patches decorated the front and sides. Founding member in bold letters. Ironside embroidered above the left pocket. Pins and badges that signified years of loyalty, miles ridden, brothers honored. Wow, Marcus breathed. William looked at his son seriously. This vest represents 40 years of my life. Every patch has a meaning, every mile has a memory. I don't wear it lightly, and I don't wear it often. But today, I'm wearing it for you. Rebecca handed Marcus his backpack, but not before pulling him into a quick hug. You're going to be fine, she whispered. Just remember, the truth always comes to light. The drive to school was quiet. William's truck rumbled through familiar streets as dawn painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus kept glancing at his father, trying to reconcile this version. Ironside, the founding member of a legendary motorcycle club, with the dad who helped him with math homework and taught him how to change a tire. Dad, Marcus finally said as they approached Jefferson Middle School. What's actually going to happen? William pulled into the drop-off area, the same spot he parked every morning. But instead of simply letting Marcus out, he put the truck in park and killed the engine. In about 5 minutes, William said, checking his watch, you're going to see what Brotherhood looks like. I've asked you to trust me before, but today I'm asking you to trust them, my brothers. They're coming because when one of us needs backup, all of us show up. That's the code. That's always been the code. Marcus could already see students arriving, backpacks slung over shoulders, clustering in their usual groups. Sarah Winters was near the front entrance. Jake Morrison stood by the bike racks. And there, holding court near the main steps with his entourage, was Dylan Chambers. As if sensing the attention, Dylan turned and spotted Marcus still sitting in the truck. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the smirk forming on Dylan's face. Could imagine the mocking comments already being prepared. Then Marcus heard it, a sound that started as a low rumble in the distance, barely distinguishable from traffic. But it grew and grew, the distinctive thunder of multiple Harley-Davidson engines getting closer with every second. William's phone buzzed. He glanced at the text message and smiled. They're here. How many? Marcus asked, his mouth suddenly dry. His father didn't answer. Instead, he nodded toward the street beyond the school parking lot. The first motorcycle appeared around the corner, a gleaming black Harley Road King with chrome that caught the morning sun. The rider wore full leather, vest displayed proudly, the Iron Wolves patch clearly visible. Then came another, and another. They rolled into view like a storm made of steel and thunder, an unbroken line of motorcycles, each one piloted by a member of the Iron Wolves. The sound was deafening, a rhythmic roar that seemed to shake the very ground. Students who'd been walking toward the school stopped dead in their tracks. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the street. Marcus watched in awe as the motorcycles kept coming. 10, 20, 30, 40. They just kept appearing, a seemingly endless procession of chrome and leather and Brotherhood. The bikes began filling the school's visitor parking area, pulling in with practice precision. Riders dismounted in synchronized movements that spoke of years riding together. They were every age. Some Marcus's father's age with grey in their beards, others younger, a few who looked like they might be college students. But they all wore the same vest, carried the same patches, moved with the same purpose. 70, 80, 90. The entire school had stopped. Teachers emerged from the building. Principal Hawkins stood on the front steps, his jaw literally hanging open. Students clustered together, phones out, recording, photographing, trying to process what they were witnessing. Marcus counted as the last few motorcycles rolled in. 97, 98, 99. The final motorcycle pulled up directly beside. William's truck, a custom Harley with intricate airbrushing along the tank. The rider was the same massive man with the grey beard Marcus had seen last night. He removed his helmet, revealing weathered features and eyes that had seen decades of road. He walked around to William's window, which rolled down smoothly. "Brother," the man said, his voice like gravel smoothed by water. "Tank," William replied, clasping hands through the window. "Thanks for coming." Tank's eyes shifted to Marcus, and his stern expression softened. "This the young man who stood up for the wolves?" Marcus nodded, unable to find his voice. "Then this is for him," Tank said simply, gesturing to the sea of motorcycles now filling the parking lot. "All 100 of us. 100. Marcus's brain struggled to process it. His father had called the entire Colorado chapter of the Iron Wolves, and every single one of them had answered. William opened his door and stepped out, and suddenly Marcus understood what was about to happen. His father wasn't just dropping him off at school anymore. Ironside had arrived, and he'd brought his brothers. Marcus stepped out of the truck on shaking legs, his backpack feeling weightless compared to the moment pressing down on him. The parking lot had transformed into something that looked like a scene from a movie. Rows of gleaming Harleys, leather-clad riders standing beside their machines, and what seemed like the entire student body of Jefferson Middle School frozen in stunned silence. William walked around the truck and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The gesture was gentle, but Marcus could feel the strength behind it. Decades of loyalty, of brotherhood, of a life lived by a code most people would never understand. Tank stepped forward, and Marcus realized just how appropriately nicknamed the man was. He stood at least 6'4" with shoulders that seemed carved from oak. His leather vest strained against a frame built from years of hard living, and his arms were covered in tattoos that told stories Marcus could only imagine. But when Tank looked down at him, his eyes were kind. "Marcus Bennett," Tank said, extending a massive hand. "Your father tells me you defended the wolves yesterday. That took guts, kid." Marcus shook the offered hand, feeling his own disappear in Tank's grip. "I just told the truth, sir." "Sir," Tank chuckled, glancing at William. "He's got manners. You raised him right, Ironside." He turned back to Marcus. "We don't need sir around here. We're family. Your father's blood is our blood, which makes you one of ours, too." The other riders had begun gathering in a loose formation behind Tank and William. Marcus recognized different patches among them. Road captain, sergeant-at-arms, treasurer, positions that suggested the club ran with military-like organization. Some wore battle ribbons that indicated military service. Others had patches commemorating fallen brothers, dates and names stitched in memorial. Principal Hawkins finally recovered enough to approach. though he kept a respectful distance. Gerald Hawkins had run Jefferson Middle School for 12 years and prided himself on maintaining order. This situation clearly fell outside his usual playbook. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice impressively steady, "I'm Principal Hawkins. While I appreciate the impressive turnout, I need to understand what's happening here. We have protocols for visitors on school grounds." William turned to face the principal, and Marcus watched his father's posture shift subtly. This wasn't the friendly construction worker who attended parent-teacher conferences. This was Ironside, a founding member of the Iron Wolves, standing with 100 brothers at his back. "Principal Hawkins," William said evenly, "I'm William Bennett, Marcus's father. Yesterday, my son was publicly humiliated in your cafeteria for telling the truth about his family. He was called a liar and mocked by his peers for claiming I was a member of the Iron Wolves motorcycle club. I wasn't aware of any incident." "You are now," Tank interjected, his gravel voice cutting through. "We don't take kindly to anyone calling our family liars. These 100 men and women standing here, we all took time off work, rode from across Colorado, because when someone disrespects one of ours, they disrespect all of us." Principal Hawkins's eyes widened slightly at the mention of 100, as if he'd been hoping the number was smaller. "I understand you're upset, but—" "We're not upset," William corrected. "We're here to set the record straight. My son told the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone in this school knows it." By now, students had crept closer, forming a wide semicircle around the confrontation. Teachers lined the school's entrance, phones in hand, some recording, others presumably calling the superintendent's office. Marcus could see Tyler in the crowd, his friend's eyes wide with amazement. Sarah Winters stood with her mouth literally hanging open. Jake Morrison looked like he was trying to memorize every detail. And there, pushing through the crowd with his usual swagger, was Dylan Chambers. Dylan's confidence faltered visibly when he took in the full scope of the situation. His eyes moved from motorcycle to motorcycle, counting, recalculating, understanding, slowly dawning that Marcus hadn't been lying. Not even a little bit. "Dylan Chambers," William called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot without shouting. Dylan froze. Several of his friends took subtle steps backward, suddenly very interested in their shoes. "Come here, son," William said. And it wasn't a request. Dylan approached with none of his usual bravado, his expensive sneakers scuffing against the asphalt. Up close, Marcus could see his tormentor's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Yesterday," William continued, addressing Dylan but speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, "you called my son a liar. You mocked him in front of his peers. You said he was desperate for attention and making up stories about his family. Is that accurate?" Dylan's mouth opened and closed. I didn't mean—" "Yes or no," William said firmly. "Did you call my son a liar?" "Yes," Dylan whispered, louder. "These people couldn't hear you." "Yes," Dylan said, his voice cracking. "Yes, I called him a liar." "But I didn't know—" "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Tank interjected. "You didn't verify. You just assumed. You know what happens when you assume, kid. You make an ass out of yourself, which is exactly what you did." Principal Hawkins stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Gentlemen, perhaps this conversation would be better had in my office." "No disrespect, Principal," William said, "but this conversation happened in your cafeteria with 100 witnesses. It gets resolved the same way." A woman rider stepped forward from the formation, removing her helmet to reveal silver hair pulled back in a tight braid. She looked to be in her 60s, with laugh lines around her eyes and a patch that read, "Founding Member Lady Wolf." "Ironside," she said, her voice carrying authority. "May I?" William nodded, stepping aside. The woman fixed Dylan with a look that could have melted steel. "Young man, I'm Catherine Whisper Delacroix. I've been riding with the Iron Wolf since 1979. I'm a retired federal judge, and I've seen every type of person walk through my courtroom, criminals, heroes, and everything in between. You know what I learned? Character isn't about how much money your parents have or what kind of shoes you wear. It's about how you treat people when there's no advantage to treating them well." Dylan had tears forming in his eyes now, his teenage pride crumbling under the weight of the moment. "You embarrassed this young man," Whisper continued, gesturing to Marcus, "because he didn't fit your idea of what family should look like. You assumed his father couldn't be part of something significant because he drives a work truck and wears jeans. That's not just wrong, it's ignorant." Tank moved to stand beside Whisper. "Every person standing in this parking lot has a story, kid. That man there?" He pointed to a rider in his 30s, wearing business casual under his vest. "He's a pediatric surgeon. Saves children's lives 5 days a week. That woman?" He indicated a lean rider with short-cropped hair. "She's a Marine Corps veteran with 2 Purple Hearts. The guy next to her? High school English teacher for 20 years. We come from every walk of life," Whisper added. "Lawyers, mechanics, teachers, veterans, construction workers, nurses. What binds us isn't our jobs or our bank accounts. It's loyalty. It's standing up for each other when the world tries to tear us down. It's being there when our brothers and sisters need us, no questions asked." William placed his hand back on Marcus's shoulder. "My son stood up for me yesterday when it would have been easier to stay quiet. He defended the Iron Wolves knowing he'd be laughed at, knowing he'd be called a liar, because he was raised to honor truth over comfort. That's more courage than most adults show in a lifetime." The parking lot was silent, except for the gentle tick of cooling motorcycle engines. Students who'd been recording had lowered their phones, caught up in the moment's gravity. Teachers watched with expressions ranging from concern to grudging respect. Dylan stood before them, no longer the cafeteria king, but just a scared 12-year-old who'd made a terrible mistake. "I'm sorry," Dylan said, and this time his voice wasn't whispering. "Marcus, I'm really sorry. I was wrong about everything." Marcus felt his father squeeze his shoulder, encouraging. He stepped forward, facing the boy who'd tormented him for years, who'd made him feel small and insignificant. "Apology accepted," Marcus said simply. Tank nodded approvingly. "That's class, kid. Takes a strong person to forgive." Principal Hawkins cleared his throat. "I think we all have some things to discuss about yesterday's incident. Dylan, you and I will be having a conversation about bullying and respect. Marcus, your father has certainly made his point." He looked at the assembled riders. "And to the Iron Wolves, thank you for the lesson in Brotherhood, though I ask that next time perhaps a phone call might suffice." That broke the tension. Several riders chuckled, and even William cracked a smile. "No promises, Principal," Tank said with a wink. "But we'll consider it." As the crowd began to disperse, students hesitantly approached the motorcycles, questions bubbling up. The riders, true to their nature, were patient and friendly, answering questions about the bikes, the club, the Brotherhood. The threatening atmosphere had transformed into something educational, even inspiring. Tyler finally made his way to Marcus, his eyes shining with excitement. "Dude," he breathed. "Your dad is literally the coolest person I've ever seen." Marcus looked at his father, who was talking with Whisper and several other founding members, and felt a surge of pride so intense it almost hurt. "Yeah," Marcus said, "he really is." The first bell rang, signaling 5 minutes until class, but nobody moved. Students remained clustered around the motorcycles, asking questions faster than the riders could answer them. Marcus watched a group of 6th graders listen with rapt attention, as a rider named Diesel, a soft-spoken veterinarian who specialized in exotic animals, explained the mechanics of his 1974 shovelhead. Sarah Winters, who'd been so quick to brag about her Broadway grandmother, approached William with unexpected humility. "Mr. Bennett, could I interview you for my social studies project instead? I mean, if you have time?" William glanced at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd be honored, Sarah. How about this Saturday? You can come by our house, meet some of the brothers who live nearby, get the full story." Her face lit up. "Really? That would be amazing." Jake Morrison wasn't far behind, practically vibrating with excitement. "Mr. Bennett, my uncle only climbed one mountain. You've been riding for 40 years. Can I interview you too?" "Plenty of story to go around," William said with a smile. "Whisper over there has some incredible tales if you want a different perspective." She once rode from Colorado to Alaska in the middle of winter. Took her 3 weeks and she's got photos to prove it. Jake's eyes went wide, and he immediately headed toward where Whisper was showing a group of girls the various patches on her vest, explaining the meaning behind each one. Principal Hawkins had retreated inside to make phone calls. Marcus could see him through his office window, gesturing animatedly to someone on the other end of the line. Probably the superintendent, possibly the school board, definitely trying to figure out how to document this unprecedented event. Mrs. Patterson, Marcus's social studies teacher, approached with her own phone out, but not to record. She was taking notes, her teacher's brain clearly working overtime. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her voice filled with genuine curiosity, "would you and some of your club members be willing to come speak to my classes? This is living history, the culture of motorcycle clubs, the sociology of Brotherhood, the demographics you represent. This could be an incredible learning opportunity." Tank, who'd overheard, stepped closer. "Ma'am, we'd be happy to. Part of our mission is community outreach, breaking down stereotypes. People see the leather and the bikes and think gang. They don't see the charity rides we organize, the veterans we support, the families we help when they're struggling. We do a toy drive every Christmas," added a younger rider named Rev, who couldn't have been more than 25. "Last year we collected over 3,000 toys for kids in foster care. We also escort funeral processions for fallen soldiers, make sure they get the honor they deserve." Mrs. Patterson was writing frantically. "This is exactly the kind of narrative we need to explore. The complexity of identity, the difference between perception and reality." As teachers and students continued engaging with the Iron Wolves, Marcus felt someone touch his elbow. He turned to find Dylan standing there, looking smaller somehow, stripped of all his earlier arrogance. "Hey," Dylan said quietly, "can we talk? Just for a second." Marcus glanced at Tyler, who gave him an encouraging nod, then followed Dylan a few feet away from the crowd. "Look," Dylan started, staring at his shoes. "What I said earlier, in front of everyone, that was just the public apology because I had to. But I wanted to say it again, just to you, where it's real." He finally looked up, and Marcus saw genuine remorse in his eyes. "I've been a complete jerk to you since 6th grade. Not just yesterday, all the time. And it wasn't because of anything you did. It was because—" He trailed off, struggling with words. "Because why?" Marcus prompted gently. "Because everything comes easy to me," Dylan admitted. "Money, popularity, sports. I never had to work for any of it. And somewhere along the way, I started thinking that made me better than other people. That if you didn't have what I had, you were less somehow." He gestured toward the parking lot full of motorcycles. "Then your dad shows up with 100 people who dropped everything to stand up for you, and I realized, I don't have that. My dad has employees, not brothers. He has business associates, not family. All my friends back there." He nodded toward his usual crew, who were keeping their distance. "The second things got real, they disappeared. But yours? Tyler stood beside you yesterday when everyone was laughing. Your dad called in his entire club." Marcus didn't know what to say. This was a side of Dylan he'd never imagined existed. "I don't expect us to be friends," Dylan continued. "I probably don't deserve that. But I want you to know I see it now, what real strength looks like. It's not about money or being popular. It's about having people who show up when you need them. And you've got that." Marcus thought about his father's words from the night before, about standing up for the truth even when it's hard. "My dad always says everyone deserves a second chance. People make mistakes, but what matters is what they do after." Dylan nodded slowly. "Then I guess I better figure out how to do better." He extended his hand. "Thank you for accepting my apology. I mean it." Marcus shook his hand, and something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, but the beginning of mutual respect. As Dylan walked away, William appeared at Marcus's side. "That took courage for him to do," his father observed. "Coming back for a private apology when nobody was watching or forcing him to. Do you think people can really change?" Marcus asked. "I've seen murderers find redemption and saints fall from grace," William said thoughtfully. People are complicated. But I believe anyone who genuinely wants to change, who puts in the work, can become better. Time will tell with Dylan, but acknowledging your mistakes is always the first step. The second bell rang, and this time students reluctantly began moving toward the building. The Iron Wolves prepared to depart, donning helmets and mounting their bikes with practiced ease. Tank approached Marcus one last time, kneeling down to be at eye level. "Young man, you did something yesterday that most people never manage. You stood alone for what you believed in. That's the foundation of integrity. Your father and I have been brothers for over 4 decades, and I see the same steel in you that I've always seen in him." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small pin, a wolf's head, identical to the larger patch on the club vests, but sized for a keychain or backpack. "This is for you. You're not a member, you're too young for that, but you're family. And family means if you ever need anything, you call. Understood?" Marcus took the pin with trembling hands. "Understood. Thank you, Tank. No, kid. Thank you. You reminded us why we wear these vests, to stand for something bigger than ourselves." The Iron Wolves fired up their engines in sequence, the sound rolling across the parking lot like thunder. William hugged his son tightly. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. Not because of yesterday, not because of today, but because of who you are. Now go learn something. I'll pick you up at 3 o'clock. Regular truck, regular clothes. This part of my life stays separate unless you need it again. Deal," Marcus said, fighting back unexpected tears. He watched his father mount his own motorcycle. When had that arrived? A beautiful black and chrome Harley that must have been delivered by another club member. William settled into the seat like he'd been born there, looking more natural on that bike than Marcus had ever seen him anywhere else. The Iron Wolves rolled out in formation, a precisely coordinated departure that showed decades of riding together. They moved as one unit, signals passing between riders without words, each person knowing their position and role. The rumble of 100 motorcycles faded gradually as they left the school grounds, heading back to jobs and families and regular lives, but the impact of their presence remained. Marcus walked into Jefferson Middle School with his head high, Tyler falling into step beside him. Students parted naturally, not out of fear but respect. Several kids nodded at him as he passed. A few 8th graders, kids who'd never acknowledged his existence before, called out greetings. In first period, Mrs. Patterson completely abandoned her lesson plan. Instead, she had the class discuss what they'd witnessed, guiding them through concepts of community, loyalty, and the danger of stereotypes. Marcus found himself called on multiple times, not as the weird kid who'd claimed to have a biker dad, but as someone with unique insight into a culture most people misunderstood. By lunch, the cafeteria had transformed. Marcus's usual corner table became the center of attention, with students pulling up chairs to ask questions. What was it like growing up with a father in the Iron Wolves? Did he get to ride motorcycles? Had he met all those people before today? Marcus answered honestly, explaining how his father had always kept his 2 worlds separate, wanting Marcus to have a normal childhood. How this morning was the first time he'd ever seen the full Brotherhood assembled. How proud he felt watching his father stand up for him. Even Dylan's table was different. Marcus noticed Dylan sitting quieter than usual, listening rather than dominating. Watching the social dynamic shift around him with thoughtful eyes, Tyler leaned over and whispered, "Dude, you're famous now. How does it feel?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. "It doesn't feel like I'm famous. It feels like people are finally seeing the truth. My dad's not just a construction worker, and our family's not just ordinary. But we were always this way. People just didn't know how to look." "That's deep, man," Tyler said with a grin. "You should write that down for your presentation." The presentation. In all the chaos, Marcus had almost forgotten about the original assignment that started everything. He pulled out his notebook and began writing, the words flowing easily now. He knew exactly what story he wanted to tell, and for the first time in his life, he didn't have to hide any part of it. His father was William Ironside Bennett, founding member of the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club, and Marcus had never been prouder to be his son. 1 week later, Marcus stood at the front of Mrs. Patterson's classroom, a USB drive containing his presentation clutched in his sweaty palm. The intervening days had been surreal, a complete inversion of his previous social standing. Students who'd ignored him for years now greeted him in the hallways. Teachers looked at him with newfound interest. Even the school administration had shifted their perspective, with Principal Hawkins personally thanking him for handling the situation with such maturity. But this moment, presenting his father's story to the same class that had witnessed his humiliation, felt more significant than anything that had happened in the parking lot. Mrs. Patterson connected his USB to the projector. Marcus, whenever you're ready. He'd spent hours on this presentation, working late into the night with his father's help. They'd gone through old photo albums, dug out newspaper clippings, and even recorded video interviews with several Iron Wolves members. His mother had contributed stories from her perspective, what it was like loving a man who lived between two worlds. The first slide appeared on the screen. A faded photograph from 1979 showing 6 young men standing beside their motorcycles in front of a garage. They looked impossibly young, full of dreams and rebellion and the kind of certainty that only comes before life teaches you about compromise. "This is my father," Marcus began, pointing to a lean figure with long hair and a confident smile. "William Bennett, though you probably know him by his road name, Ironside." He was 22 years old in this photo, fresh out of the army, working construction during the day and riding at night. He and 5 friends founded the Colorado chapter of the Iron Wolves motorcycle club that summer. He clicked to the next slide, a close-up of his father's vest with all its patches visible. People see this vest and make assumptions. They see leather and motorcycles and think criminal or dangerous. But every patch tells a story of service. This one, he pointed to a small American flag, represents his 3 years in the army. This ribbon is for his Purple Heart. He was wounded in combat, but never talks about it because he says the real heroes didn't come home. The classroom was silent. Even students who'd been quietly scrolling on hidden phones had looked up. These patches here represent charity rides. The Iron Wolves organize fundraisers for children's hospitals, veterans services, and disaster relief. Last year alone, they raised over $200,000 for various causes. This patch, he indicated a small memorial ribbon, honors a brother who died in a motorcycle accident in 1995. My father and his club attended the funeral, and they've been supporting that man's widow and children ever since. She calls them her family because that's what they are. Marcus clicked to a video. Tank's weathered face filled the screen, recorded in the Bennett family living room just days ago. "People ask me what brotherhood means." Tank's recorded voice rumbled. "It means when my wife died of cancer, I had 50 men show up at the hospital, not because they had to, but because that's what family does. It means when Ironside's son needed backup, we all came. No debate, no hesitation. You call, we answer. That's the code we live by." The video shifted to Whisper, her silver hair catching the light. "I became a federal judge because I believe in justice," she said. "And I joined the Iron Wolves because I found justice there too. Not the legal kind, but the human kind. These people don't care about your bank account or your job title. They care about your character, your loyalty, whether you'll stand beside them when things get hard. I've sentenced criminals to prison, and I've ridden thousands of miles with saints. Sometimes they're the same person at different points in their life. The Iron Wolves gave me a family when I had none, and I've spent 30 years trying to honor that gift." Marcus paused the video. "My father kept this part of his life separate from me because he wanted me to form my own identity. He didn't want me defined by his choices or his reputation. But last week, when I was called a liar for telling the truth about him, he showed me what it means to stand up for your family." He clicked to the next slide, a photo taken the morning of the parking lot assembly. 100 motorcycles gleaming in the sunrise, riders standing in formation, his father front and center with Tank and Whisper beside him. This is what showed up when my dad made one phone call. Not because they wanted to intimidate anyone or prove something, but because when you're part of something bigger than yourself, you answer the call. Every single person in this photo has a job, a family, responsibilities. They all took time off work, rode from across the state, because that's what Brotherhood demands. Sarah Winters raised her hand tentatively. Marcus, I interviewed your dad like you suggested. He told me about a ride they did for a little girl with cancer. Can you tell that story? Marcus smiled. He'd hoped someone would ask. Emma Rodriguez. She was 7 years old, diagnosed with stage 4 leukemia. Her father, Miguel, was a prospect, someone hoping to join the club. Emma's biggest dream was to ride a motorcycle, but she was too weak from chemotherapy. So the Iron Wolves organized what they called an angel ride. They got permission from her doctors, fitted a special sidecar with medical equipment and cushions, and took Emma on a ride through the mountains. He clicked to a photo his father had given him, a tiny, bald girl strapped into a sidecar, wearing a child-sized leather vest and the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen. 50 motorcycles escorted her on a 2-hour ride. They stopped at a lake where the club was having a barbecue, and every member came to meet her, sign her vest, tell her she was an honorary Iron Wolf. She died 3 weeks later, but her mother said those 2 hours were the happiest of Emma's life. The Iron Wolves paid for her funeral and still visit her grave every year on her birthday. Several students were wiping their eyes. Mrs. Patterson had her hand over her mouth. Marcus took a breath, steadying himself. My father isn't perfect. The Iron Wolves aren't perfect. But they represent something I think we've lost in a lot of modern life, genuine loyalty. They don't abandon each other when it's inconvenient. They don't choose money over friendship. They show up, no matter what. He clicked to the final slide, a recent photo of Marcus and his father working on a motorcycle in their garage, both smiling, grease on their hands. Last weekend, my dad started teaching me about motorcycles. Not so I'll join the club someday, that's my choice to make when I'm older, but so I'll understand the craft, the commitment, the responsibility. He told me that riding a bike requires constant attention. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and you can get hurt. But when you respect the machine, learn its language, ride with people you trust, there's nothing else like it. That freedom, that clarity. Marcus closed his presentation. My father is William Ironside Bennett. He's a construction worker, a veteran, a husband and a father. He's also a founding member of one of the most respected motorcycle clubs in Colorado. All of those things are true at once. He taught me that you don't have to choose just one identity. You can honor all the parts of yourself if you live with integrity. He looked directly at Dylan, who met his gaze without flinching. He also taught me that everyone deserves respect until they prove otherwise. And even then, everyone deserves a second chance. I forgot that lesson for a minute last week, and I'm glad I remembered it. The classroom erupted in applause. Mrs. Patterson was openly crying now, not even trying to hide it. Students were standing, clapping harder than Marcus had ever heard for any presentation. Tyler whooped from the back row. "That's my best friend, everyone." Dylan stood too, clapping steadily, and when Marcus caught his eye again, Dylan nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement, respect, maybe even the beginning of friendship. As Marcus returned to his seat, Mrs. Patterson composed herself enough to speak. "That was extraordinary, Marcus. You've given us all something to think about. The way we judge people based on surface appearances, the value of loyalty, the complexity of identity. This is exactly what education should be, challenging our assumptions and expanding our understanding." After class, students crowded around Marcus with questions. What was it like riding on a motorcycle? Did he get to go to club meetings? Would the Iron Wolves come back to speak to other classes? Marcus answered patiently, aware that his life had fundamentally changed. Not because of the presentation or the parking lot assembly, but because he'd finally stopped hiding a truth he'd been ashamed of for no good reason. That afternoon, when William picked him up in his regular work truck, Marcus climbed in with a lightness he hadn't felt in years. "How'd it go?" his father asked. "I told your story," Marcus said. Our story. And everyone listened. William pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward home. Your mother's making pot roast tonight. Tank and Whisper are coming over for dinner. Perfect, Marcus said, meaning it. As they drove through familiar streets, Marcus looked at his father. Really looked at him. The graying hair, the calloused hands, the gentle eyes that had seen combat and brotherhood, and the long road between who you are and who you become. This man had built houses and raised a son, and ridden thousands of miles with people who'd become family. Dad? Marcus said quietly. Thank you for showing up, for calling the club, for teaching me what loyalty looks like. William reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. You stood up first, kid. I just backed your play. That's what family does. They drove the rest of the way home, in comfortable silence, the autumn sun painting the Colorado sky in shades of gold and orange. Somewhere across the state, 99 other iron wolves were going about their lives, teaching classes, performing surgeries, fixing cars, fighting fires. Different professions, different backgrounds, bound together by something deeper than blood. Brotherhood and Marcus Bennett, 12 years old, and finally understanding what that word truly meant. Couldn't wait to tell his children about it someday. The Iron Wolves had shown up when it mattered, and they always would. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.